Every doctor, nurse, administrator, IT professional, marketer, and patient wants to modernize healthcare. We all want to use the latest tools, technologies, and techniques to make healthcare better. Well, what if I told you that there's a 30-year-old law that is standing in the way of using text messaging? Well, joining me on camera to talk about this is Abner Mason, a tireless advocate for patients and for better access to care. He is the Chief Strategy and Transformational Officer at GroundGame.Health. You don't want to miss what he has to say. Let's get to it.
Sway help.
Abner, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Colin. Great to be here.
I know we normally do this in person, so I'm a little bit sad we're not in person, but great to have you here virtually. It's good to see you, my friend. And maybe before we get started into this really interesting topic today, can you give our audience a little bit about you and where you are right now?
Sure. So again, I'm Abner Mason, and my job, full-time job, is I'm Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer for GroundGame.Health, which is a company that focuses on solving social needs. So we partner with health plans. When health plans identify that their members have social need, GroundGame.Health reaches out to those members and solves their social need. I've been in this role about a year and 2 months because Ground Game acquired the company that I was founder and CEO of, Same Sky Health. So now Same Sky and Ground Game are one company, and we're doing, I think, an incredible job solving members' social needs. And I'm still based in Los Angeles, but we serve clients around the country.
When you say social needs, Abner, what do you mean by that?
So, for instance, if a health plan partner of ours has a member, and we work across lines of business, Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, exchange, and commercial. But let's say that the plan has a member who has food insecurity. They don't have food to eat that night for themselves or their family. And the plan knows this. Plans are increasingly in a position where they want to help that member and they're incentivized to help that member. They've got some funding, they can use some premium dollars to help that member. But if the plan is headquartered wherever they're headquartered and the member needs food tonight, how the plan is like, well, how do I get food to that member tonight? And so they reach out to us, and what we have learned is that the best way to solve a social need, it could be food. In this instance, we're talking about food. It could be housing. It could be transportation. It could be domestic violence. It could be a whole host of issues. But let's say it's food. We found that the best way to help that member tonight is to connect them with local community-based solutions. A food bank that's in their neighborhood, that's down the street, that may be at the corner church. The problem is those community-based groups really have a tough time contracting with the health plan because the health plan is big. It's a health plan. You've got to be high trust to contract with them. You got to have insurance to contract with them. And so typically these smaller community-based groups that are best positioned to meet the need of the member, they can't contract with the health plan. So what Ground Game Health does is we sit in the middle. We contract with the health plan. We call that upstream. We contract with the community-based group. We call that downstream. We have a technology platform that we identify that member, verify they have a need, in this case, food. We connect them with a local community-based group. We make sure they're fed. We have a closed loop that we can then confirm to the health plan that that member got food. And the health plan then sends a payment that flows through our platform, and we pay the food bank or that food pantry. So it creates a sort of virtuous cycle. We're creating capacity in the community, but most important, that member is getting food. So that's what we do.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. And I think it's important to note that, you know, yes, there is sort of a moral, side to this, but also there's a practical, right? Like the when you can solve transportation, food insecurity, and these problems, it prevents people from going to the ED and tying up resources, and it prevents further health issues or more severe health issues down the road. So it just decreases the strain on the system, which we're
No
seeing some
question.
of that strain appear.
No
Right?
question about it. You're right. There is a moral component to it, but the reason I think that increasingly health plans are willing to invest is because there's a return on investment. They're not going to solve that member's clinical needs if they don't help solve their social needs. So if that member, for instance, that we're talking about here as an example, has diabetes, you're never going to get their diabetes under control, no matter how much you spend, if you don't get them food. So we want to get them food tonight, but we also want to get them signed up for instance, for SNAP, so that they have food on an ongoing basis. So solving that social need is short term and long term is key to solving the clinical need. And that's why the plans are doing it.
Well, it's clear we can hear the passion in your voice, Abner, on this topic. It's something you've been advocating for years. I mean, ever since I've known you, you've been in this space. But we're here today to talk about something that's kind of more in the technology world, which was what got me interested when you emailed me, which is around, we have laws in place, many of them. And there are, I mean, I'm just going to use the general sense. There are laws from decades ago that are still in place that never could imagine the modern world, right?
Right,
I mean, we have
right,
transportation laws that never could foresee, drones, and
right.
we have transportation laws that could never foresee the superhighways that we have today. And so there's all these antiquated laws sitting out there that probably prevent people from going faster than certain speeds and things like that. But we have one in the healthcare world that you highlighted to me, which is preventing the use of texting. And, we think about that today, texting's been around for a long time. Sure, healthcare has only recently, relatively recently, embraced it. But Amner, in the context of what you just described, where is texting used and most useful in healthcare?
So what we have found, and this is true in the work we do at GroundGame.Health now, but it's been true in the work that I did at Same Sky Health from the time I founded the company. So it's been over 10 years of engaging with health plan members across all lines of business. So this is Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, exchange, and commercial. Americans today primarily communicate via text messaging. You go to anywhere and ask. I do this a lot. I ask any audience. I say, raise your hand if the primary way that you communicate with family, friends, coworkers is U.S. mail, and no one raises their hand. Snail mail. No one. I ask them, well, what is it? Is it phone calls? And do you answer the phone when it rings? No one raises. I don't answer the phone. And in fact, people are cutting their landlines. They're increasingly using their mobile phones. They don't even have a landline, and they don't even answer their mobile phone unless they know who it is. And so I say, what about email? Well, I might look at it a week later or something, but I might look at work email, but personal email, not really. And then I don't know which is which. So I say, how? So when I say, well, how do you communicate? Overwhelmingly, they say text messaging, instant messaging. Text messaging is how people communicate across every income level in the U.S. And so that's what we found, and it's true in healthcare. And increasingly, healthcare folks are using texting to communicate with their patients and plans with their members, with the exception of Medicaid. That's the problem. Medicaid has this unique sort of situation that we can talk more about that really constrains the ability of Medicaid managed care plans in particular. And most, Medicaid in the U.S. now is managed care. It's managed by health plans. This law, this old 34-year-old law called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, prevents health plans, managed Medicaid plans, from conveniently and easily using texting as a mode of communication for Medicaid members, even though that's the primary way that Medicaid members want to communicate. And in many instances, it's the only way they're going to communicate.
So let's dive into that. So texting is used in this context in healthcare for a variety of reasons, right? It's to confirm appointments. It's to send links to things. I mean, we use texting a lot in healthcare for a variety of reasons. Sounds like what you're telling me is that there's a law that's preventing that for managed plans and managed care.
For managed in Medicaid in particular, because
Okay.
this law, and I can describe it briefly, it's called the
Yeah.
Telephone Consumer Protection Act. It was passed in 1991, so 34 years ago, before texting was even a thing. This law passed, and it passed in the context of, at the time, there was a lot of robocall technology that had been developed, and Americans were being inundated by phone calls at dinner time, in the morning, in the evening, and Americans, American consumers got upset because they were constantly getting these calls. And so the Congress got involved and said, we're going to do something about it. And they created the Telephone Consumer Protection Law. It was signed into law by President Bush, the father, not the son. So that's how old this law is. And what the law says is that and they included texting. For some reason, even though texting wasn't a thing, they thought, well, maybe it'll become a thing. So we want to stop that too. So they included texting, and they said, with respect to texting, you can't text someone unless you have permission from that person in advance to send that text. So you can't send the text to someone unless that someone has given you permission or consent to send them a text. And if you do send a text without consent, there's a financial penalty per infraction. So each time you do it. So let's talk about Medicaid plans. In Medicaid, unlike Medicare Advantage and Exchange and commercial, Medicaid members don't pick their plan. So the Medicaid plans and their lawyers have taken the position that because members are assigned to them by the millions, there's 80 million Americans on Medicaid, those members haven't given consent because they didn't pick the plan, so they didn't give consent to be texted. So the legal departments at the Medicaid managed care plans have taken the position that they don't have consent, and therefore, if they were to send a text, they're violating the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and their violations $500 per infraction. And if you do it intentionally, it's triple, so it's $1,500. So think if you've got 100,000 members or 500,000 Medicaid members, you do the math, you can see why the lawyers and the risk folks at the health plans, at the managed Medicaid plans say, we don't want to do that because if we are found in violation of this old law, the financial penalties are enormous.
Got it. Okay, so it's preventing them from, you need consent in order to send someone a text, but in this instance, they haven't specifically given consent to that particular plan because they don't choose them.
They don't choose them; they're assigned to them. In every state, all across the country, you get assigned to a plan. You don't pick it. Unlike Medicare Advantage, where you pick your plan, commercial, your employer picks it, and the employer works out rules. And even on the exchange, the Obamacare or the exchange plans, you pick a plan, platinum, silver, you pick it. And so there are different rules that apply, but Medicaid is very unique. And it's not as though this law is not a problem in the other lines of business. It's just that it's not as big a problem. It's a huge problem in Medicaid.
Gotcha. So in other words, today, when you're on a Medicaid plan, I can't get, as a patient, I wouldn't be able to get texts for any reason, like, reminding me of my appointment or all those kinds of things, unless I've because I haven't given any, that's probably a bad example because a plan doesn't do that, but you know what I mean? Like you can't get text messages from them for any reason.
Right. So the plan is stuck. They're like, well, how do I get consent? And what some plans have done is they've said, look, we've got to communicate with our members. We got to help them manage their health. There's preventive screenings, well child visits and diabetes screenings, A1C screenings and breast cancer screenings. We've got to communicate with our members. And so what they've said is, well, we'll send the first text and ask for consent. And even though that's a violation, we're going to take the risk. But some plans have done that, and I admire those plans. And kudos to them for being willing to kind of put the health of the member first. But other plans have said, hey, we just can't take the risk. And so we're unwilling to do it. And so they try to call to get consent, or they try to send a letter to get consent. I mean, it's just, Americans nowadays, they're not even thinking about getting their mail and reading it and looking to give consent through the mail. It's just not a practical solution today.
Right. Gotcha. So they're having to do all these workarounds. Either they're taking a risk, which some of them are brave enough and courageous enough to do that. Others are using these other methods, trying to call them, trying to mail them and get that consent in order to be able to text them.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that definitely seems very strange in today's world. And we got to remember, like, even at doctors' offices, you're signing consent when you sign up for those intake forms, right? It's buried in there. Right. But that's not that can't happen when you're signing up for this for the Medicaid plan, because that's not, you're not physically in an office and you're not signing up on the website. Exactly. It's done through intermediaries. Gotcha. Okay, thank you for explaining that to me. So Abner, why is this? I mean, it's been a problem for a long time, but why is this a bigger problem now all of a sudden?
So you're exactly right. It's been a problem for a long time. Ever since texting became more and more and more common as the way that for people to communicate, the problem has gotten worse. But up until now, the major reason that health plans and frankly, this applies to state Medicaid agencies and counties. So everyone is subject to federal laws, not just the health plans. Up until now, the primary reason the health plans wanted to reach out to the member was to improve their health. As I said, to get someone to come in for a well child visit, or to a breast cancer screening, or an A1C diabetes screening. It was all around preventive screenings and appointments and trying to get that member to stay healthy. But now there is legislation that has passed the House, and it's in the Senate. It's being considered in the Senate as part of the 2025 reconciliation bill, This House passed bill includes a national federal work requirement. And it looks like the Senate is going to also put that similar language in their bill. So they're going to include a federal work requirement. And this is for Medicaid alone. So for Medicaid, a federal work requirement. And what the requirement says is that if you're on Medicaid, you have to prove each month that you are working or volunteering or otherwise exempt from the work requirement. So every month there's got to be an exchange of information. And secondly, there's an additional requirement that now twice a year, instead of once a year, you have to go through a redetermination process, which means you have to prove that you are qualified income-wise in the state that you're in to be on Medicaid. So you need two different communications to prove you are qualified for Medicaid, and you need monthly communication to prove that you are working or volunteering or in school or you're a caregiver or some other thing, or you're exempt. The need for, and if you don't comply with this new work requirement and the redetermination requirement, you lose your Medicaid. So the need to communicate, to modernize communication, and I want to really emphasize here, what this is really all about, when I'm talking about, is modernizing communication. Right today, Medicaid is forced to use, 31-year-old law by a 31-year-old law to use an old form of communication, even though the country has changed and Americans have changed, and we need to modernize communication in Medicaid. And so what I'm arguing for is, if you're going, this is a moment when the need has been greater than ever. We needed to modernize before to improve health. Now we need to modernize, not just to improve health, but for people to even keep their health insurance. Many people will lose their health insurance, but not because they're not qualified, not because they don't meet the requirement, but because they have to fax in their monthly information. Who has a fax machine nowadays? How do you prove that you're working if you've got to use old technology like faxes and phone calls? So all I'm saying is, why can't we modernize the way people communicate in Medicaid? It's 2025. Let's make sure that Medicaid and the way people communicate reflects 2025.
Right. So short of the mailbox companies that who have a fax machine, other than them who may benefit from this, and let's be honest, they're probably not a very powerful lobby in DC. It sounds like what you're saying to me, Abner, is like, look, we just need to modernize this for a variety of reasons, but it made more acute because of this particular requirement for the workforce, which we're not arguing whether it's good or not. It's just the fact that this is now the law of the land.
Right.
In order to comply, to make it easier to comply with that, and make sure these people who are qualified, who do meet all the requirements, can continue to get and be on that program, is to allow that for that kind of communication via text, that confirmation via text.
Exactly. And we have one example of why this is so important. One state, Arkansas, implemented a work requirement program during the first Trump administration. And what they found was a huge number of people lost their eligibility for Medicaid, not because they weren't qualified or they didn't meet the state's work requirement, but because they couldn't communicate that information. The state was constrained in communicating to the member was constrained in communicating to the state, and the result was people lost their health insurance, not because they weren't qualified, but because they couldn't communicate. Given what happened in Arkansas, we have the data. We should make sure that if we're going to roll this out nationally across all 50 states and the territories, let's make sure that we don't have a repeat of what happened in Arkansas. And that's why the moment is now to modernize the way we communicate in Medicaid.
So is that what the solution is, Abner, in terms of allowing Medicaid and managed plans in general to communicate with people even when they don't have consent? Is that kind of the thing? Because we obviously we don't want to allow the whole floodgate to open where anybody can communicate via text. But is it sort of the exception that you're recommending, or that you're seeking to say, hey, listen, for healthcare reasons, please allow this?
Yeah, I'm arguing for, pushing for, hoping for a very narrow exemption. I'm asking, because we have an opportunity in the Senate now for the Senate to include in their bill a simple exemption that says Medicaid managed care plans and counties and states are exempt from the TCPA, this old 1991 law, when they're engaging or communicating with Medicaid members, either current members or prospective members, or even members who've lost their eligibilities. For instance, if they've lost their eligibility, but it was not legit, the plan should be able to reach out to them and say, let's figure out what information you need to give us. So it's a very simple thing: exempt plans and states and counties from TCPA, from the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. Very narrow, very simple, very clean, and that would solve the problem for Medicaid.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, I got to ask this, Abner. I mean, okay, that sounds very logical, right? We make an exception for healthcare and allow them to, even a mechanism to say, hey, listen, maybe you can text them 2 or 3 times to get consent, right? Like, and that's not a violation of the law. Like, even something as simple as that kind of exemption. I mean, let's be honest, like, it's pretty hot political environment right now. What do you feel the likelihood of an exemption like this being passed?
It's always hard to change federal law. So it's an uphill climb in every instance to change federal law. But I think because there is an interest in making, I think there's an interest, a bipartisan interest in making sure that if we're going to implement a work requirement, if we're going to do it, that we do it in a way that that makes sense and that doesn't unnecessarily kick people off of Medicaid who are otherwise entitled. I think there's an interest now in modernization. The administration, the Trump administration and HHS under Oz, they've all talked about modernizing and actually treating the American consumer, the American citizen, more like a consumer, and modernizing the way the government interacts with them. So I think there's an argument to be made here that we want to implement work requirements in a way that makes sense and that's fair and just and fair-minded. I think that there's an argument that says we ought to modernize. This is the more efficient way to communicate. It's actually cheaper. It's easier to track. There's a fraud and abuse angle here that it's easier to track information than if someone just made a phone call and was just talking to someone on the phone. So I'm hopeful that in this moment, cooler heads will prevail and people will say, it just, if I'm going to use an analogy, but to me it makes sense. Why would you make people use a horse and buggy when you know there's a better way to get from point A to point B? Why would you insist them they use a horse and buggy today when there are better ways to get from A to B? Why are we going to insist that people use old technology to communicate when we know there are better ways that make more sense, they're more cost effective, they're more modern, so I'm hopeful that reason will prevail here, and that the folks in folks in the Senate will say, this makes sense. If we're going to do work requirements, let's do it in a rational, modern way.
Yeah, I mean the other rational way to look at this is saying, look, by implementing the work requirement, that's the reason that you're going to prevent fraud and make sure that people who are qualify for that program. Right? You've already put that in place.
Right.
There's not a need for, I'll call it, an extra layer where there's going to be people who are going to be, frankly, very upset, who do meet all the requirements, who now all of a sudden won't, just because they can't communicate.
Right.
I mean, if I was a constituent, I'd be pretty mad, and
Right.
I'd be phoning my senator and phoning all this.
Right.
So, to your point, this doesn't do anything more to curtail what I think this law was trying to do. This new requirement is trying to do. So why do that? Why put why make the American public that much more mad, right? Just modernize it. And to your point, there has been a movement in the administration to modernize things, right? Yeah. And hey, we are in the world of using text. I'm pretty sure they're not going to go as far as using direct messaging, but hey, one step at a time. Text is
one step at a,
the next step, right?
Yeah.
So what are you guys? I mean, what have you been doing, Abner, to try and bring attention to this, other than doing things like this? Have you gotten any reception from the government or different levels? Are there people that are receptive to the idea?
So we are fully engaged with trying to talk with folks on the Senate side, because that's where we need to act now. And even on the Republican side in the Senate, it really makes sense to have a Republican sponsor this for a whole host of reasons. But it's bipartisan. This is not a Democrat, Republican, or blue, red, blue. This is like, it's horse and buggy versus car, or it's
Right.
old versus modern. And so, but we know, practically speaking, we've got to get some language in the Senate. So we are talking with folks in the Senate. I've reached out to people I know and manage Medicaid, to a plan. I've talked personally to probably 10, maybe 15 managed Medicaid plans. They all agree on the policy. And so we are now reaching out to the trade associations, MHPA, the Medicaid Health Plans of America, and AHIP, the America's Health Insurance Plans. We're reaching out to them to talk with them. Many of them know about this issue. They've dealt with it in the past. So we're hoping to get them on board. So the process is early. The legislation just passed the House about 10, 15 days ago. And so we're now in the Senate, so we're early, but we are trying to reach out to everyone we know and using all of our contacts. And I'm grateful to you, because part of what we need to do here is shed light on this issue. And so you're helping to shed light on it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, fax does have a place in healthcare. Let's be honest, it has a place, but in this context, probably not the most practical way to communicate with patients and plan members. So I like it. I like it in the fact that we're all really trying to go for the same thing, which is to your point, removing the horse and buggy requirement and just going with modern technology. So
Right. Just
I
that
like that.
simple.
So Abner, I got a final question then. Where can people go to connect with you and maybe, help or find out more about this issue that you've raised with us today?
Yeah, so they can certainly, reach me. I'm available. You can share this. My email, because I'm trying to build support for this, is abner.m@groundgame.health. I'm reaching out to everyone, and I would encourage people to call their senator and say a simple thing: please support modernizing communication in Medicaid. Call your senator and ask your senator to please support modernizing communication in Medicaid.
Okay. All right. And of course, they can find you on LinkedIn. I think that's probably one of
Oh,
the
and I'm
best
on
ways
LinkedIn. Yes, please.
to get you
And
there.
there's some articles and other things on LinkedIn that support this. So please, it's Abner Mason on LinkedIn. So reach out.
Awesome. Abner, it's been always a pleasure to speak with you. Thanks for raising this important issue with us here today. And I really appreciate you being on the program.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Colin. Really appreciate it.
Can you imagine being forced to drive a horse and buggy when cars became affordable for everyone? Or could you imagine today that the only way to book an airline ticket was to go to an airline's office because for some reason 30 years ago the FAA passed a law that forbade airlines from using the internet? Well, until Abner reached out, I didn't realize that texting without consent could be such a barrier to health. I can't thank Abner enough for being willing to go on camera to educate me and to highlight why this law needs to change for all of us to access care. I'm Colin Hung. Thanks for being here, and I'll catch you on the next video.